With only 2 games on tap for Wednesday, what initially seemed like a quiet night in the NHL ended up being one with plenty of action. Welcome into another episode of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
As I said, back with you, another episode of Locked On NHL Game Night. I'm Mike Asti, a digital journalist in the Pittsburgh market, most notably with Yardbarker, and I host the podcast Mic Drop that's played on SiriusXM, and I'm joined alongside for this edition of the show by TJ Chillot, a professional hockey play-by-play man and a colleague here with Locked On. Welcome again to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 podcast network. And TJ, we went into this night thinking 2 games, bubble teams, maybe it'd be a slow night. What are we going to talk about? And we both are skilled in talking if need be, so I wasn't really worried about filling time no matter what went down. But yet, we had one really close game, one important close game, and another game that, yeah, there was separation and it wasn't really close, but it's important nonetheless. So we had some action on this hump day 2-game slate and this weird quirk of the NHL schedule. There's going to be a lot of games tomorrow, but only 2 on this one.
And only 2 on Thursday, too. So they go right, or maybe it's 3, but they only have a couple the following night. So the scheduling's all kind of out of whack. But yeah, 100%. I was pleasantly surprised by the games that we did see. They put on a big show, being the only attention in town. And even that Philadelphia-Washington game, it was 4-1, but you take out that garbage time goal, it was still a decent contest, even though Washington didn't bring their best. And I'm sure we'll get talking about that in a bit.
Yeah, 100%. And there are a lot of games on the March 12th slate, by the way. There's only the 2 on Friday the 13th. So Friday the 13th, we'll have the 2. There's a lot of games on the Thursday slate. But on this program, we just have these 2, and we're going to start with the better of the 2 games. It's fair to give it to the better of the 2 games. Montreal getting by Ottawa 3-2. Ivan Dimov ended up getting the game winner there at the end, a goal and an assist, 3 shots on goal for him. He kind of stood up and led the way. Some could argue this is a team that doesn't really have a true superstar, but maybe you could point to him as one of the better players on this team, now around 50 points on the year. And Ottawa looked like they were going to get this victory early on in this game. They hadn't lost a game in regulation in a while. We'll hear from their Locked On host, who will tell us all about that streak now being snapped for them as they're trying to play for their lives. But Montreal is a team that's trying to show that they can actually make some noise and actually contend and be a playoff team and do something when they get there. So what do you make of this result here? Ottawa was kind of soaring up the charts until they meet the rival in Montreal.
Yeah, I think this says a little bit more about Montreal than it does necessarily about Ottawa. Right now, with this win, Montreal has 82 points on the season. They're tied for second in the Atlantic with Tampa Bay, who seems to be everybody's darling pick to come out of the East, if not Buffalo. It seems like everybody's putting their money on Tampa Bay to be the team representing the East. Sure. I think this was a good game for Montreal. They played really smart, and they took over right away. Ottawa shot themselves in the foot right out of the gate. 30 seconds in, goaltender interference call. That allows the power play. Slavkovsky scores on the power play to make it 1-0. And ever since then, Ottawa's chasing the game. So I think, Montreal did everything they possibly could do, taking the opportunities in front of them, seizing those opportunities, getting out in front. Plus, they had a good night from Jacob Fowler, who made 32 saves.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they got the victory. They did in regulation. They were the better team throughout the game, but it's been a while since Ottawa lost in regulation. They were a team that some thought, Brady Tkachuk doing so well in the Olympics, that could pivot over to the NHL. He was hurt a lot in the first half of the season, and they could make a run. They've been one of the surprise stories of the season, you could certainly say. So on the Ottawa side of things, a tough fight in there, but it does appear that maybe they're going to fade out, and we will now hear from our Locked On Senators host on his thoughts on Ottawa's regulation loss to Montreal. That has to just sting in general, let alone what it does to you in the standings.
For the first time since February 3rd, the Ottawa Senators failed to register a point in a game after they lose 3-2 in regulation to the Montreal Canadiens. I'm Brandon Pillar from the Locked On Senators podcast, and this is a tough one to get no points from as the Sens outshoot the Canadiens 34-23. They push at the end of the game with the goalie pulled, but credit to Jacob Fowler. He makes all the saves he has to make. And that's the difference in this one, as one save that Allmark is not able to make leaves a juicy rebound for Ivan Demidov to score, and that's the game winner. Another one where the Sens deserve to win this one, let alone get at least 1 point. But it's a tough bounce, and they let their rivals win. We're going to get into this game much more in the postcast and, of course, on tomorrow's episode of the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
And the weirdest thing about the Senators, too, it almost feels like that while they've been kind of a team that's been hanging around and feeling like maybe they could do something this year and kind of above expectations, they have not been getting the national conversation or any love. I feel like a lot of casual fans probably aren't aware of what he just said, that it had been since February 3rd for them to lose in regulation. They have been one of the hotter teams in the league to even be relevant right now, and not really fully getting their just due probably for that, which is probably the life of being an Ottawa Senators fan. But TJ, looking at this season now, overall for Ottawa, assuming that they don't get in and then don't really go anywhere, do you look at this season as a quality, successful year to be above expectations, or do you look at it maybe kind of what our Locked On host is kind of alluding to there, that maybe it's a what-if story, that yes, nobody thought they'd be here, but they've blown a lot of games, and maybe this even being one of them, that they feel like that, forget expectations, they should have maybe 10 more points, 5 more points, and then they're a playoff team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're 6-2-2 in their last 10. And out of every team, both sides, whether you're talking Eastern Conference, Western Conference, they have the highest goal differential of any team that's not in the playoffs. They're playing at a plus 15. For you to be at a plus 15, you should be in at least a wild card spot. So that tells me you're winning games by a whole lot, and then you're also losing games by a whole lot, and you're just kind of up and down. Now, they've been playing a lot better as of late, and look, the season's not over. You know, they're only, 5 points right now out of that final wild card spot that's occupied by Boston. Now, the Bruins are going to play tomorrow night, so they might increase that, but 5 points out is far from a far cry out. So they just got to keep doing what they're doing. Again, they're 6-2-2. This, it's not like they're on a losing streak. This was just their first loss. They won their game prior. So if I'm Ottawa, I am looking at this. We're playing above expectation, but we're going to keep shooting for as much above expectation as we can be, and that's going to be punching our ticket to the playoffs. Then once you get in, it's winning a round, and then once you get to that point, it's coming out of the East as the Eastern Conference champions. That's how you have to have your mindset, right? But right now they are playing above expectation. Now, what does the future hold? That's a different story. I'm sure we're going to get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, that's what you call a tease there in the radio business. We're going to talk about that. We're going to get into that in our third segment of the show. Again, TJ Chillot, Mike Asti here, Locked On NHL Game Night. Only 2 games on this Hump Day Wednesday, but 2 important games nonetheless. And I do kind of want to wrap up the Canadian Senators conversation with going to the winner. Montreal now 36-18-10, 82 points. They're a little bit different of a story than Ottawa, certainly better positioning in terms of the playoff race, but they're also a team that no one's really predicting to do anything. You mentioned Tampa Bay, Buffalo, even Pittsburgh if they get a healthy Sidney Crosby back. People even bring up Detroit and the Red Wings if they get fully healthy and Gibson plays well enough in net. And they're actually behind Montreal in the standings, but they're on the national conversation shows a lot more often. What do you think of Montreal's legit chances to do something throughout the spring and then even into June if they could potentially make a deep run, or is just getting there kind of enough for this team?
I think it's going to hinge mostly on goaltending, depending on what they can get out of Fowler and Jakub Dobiš. That's going to be a huge factor because I do think they have the right pieces in place as far as forwards, defensemen are concerned. We'll talk about this more later too, I'm sure, but I love what Marty St. Louis is doing with that team, and you can just see he coaches the exact same he used to play. So I definitely think that they could cause a problem. They could be one of those teams that knocks out a very difficult, lingering, maybe a New York Islander team, that everybody was pretty high on, or even that Pittsburgh team that you were just mentioning. Maybe Montreal sees them early and knocks them out, and it just changes kind of the whole landscape of the Eastern Conference. But they are forgotten about. I think these are the two less spoken of Canadian franchises. You've got Vancouver, who's just awful. You've got Edmonton with the McDavids and the Dreisaitl's and the back-to-back Stanley Cup appearances. You've got Toronto, who is obviously
Toronto, right. They're just going to be talked about no matter what, right? They're
no matter what. And so you kind of forget about Ottawa. You forget about Montreal every now and then. I think Montreal is quietly a very dangerous team.
Yeah. And I will also throw this out there to any of our Canadian friends that are watching and listening. We are both Americans, so maybe there's an American bias to say that they're not talked about enough. They're not in the national conversation enough. They certainly aren't here. Maybe in Canada, they are more. Obviously, much more Montreal than Ottawa. Montreal is the historic franchise with all the Stanley Cups, the most ever. Ottawa, not so much. So Montreal, I'm sure, is getting talked about. Ottawa probably still feels like they're kind of the undercard even in their country. But if you compare it to, as you mentioned, the other teams from Canada and even how often they're talked about in the U.S. by U.S. media, it's still more than Montreal, who right now is a better team than Edmonton and some of these other teams, certainly than Toronto, that's getting more of the national conversation. When we return, though, we have another game on the docket, just one more game on the docket. We have much more to talk about on this show. Philadelphia Flyers, they take care of business. They handle the Washington Capitals, and maybe Alexander Ovechkin is going to continue to be sad. He's kind of been in a sad state of affairs here since the deadline. I feel bad for the man just a little bit. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why the Gametime app has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast, without any hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Pull up the Gametime app, pick your upcoming NBA game, and you get tickets in your hand in a matter of minutes. Love seeing all the action up front. Love seeing all the prices up front. No surprise fees at checkout. That can all be right in your hands again in a matter of moments. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today, and remember, it's gametime.com. Back with you, Mike Asti, TJ Chillot, NHL Game Night. And the other game on this Wednesday, 2 games only. We're not wrong. 2 games were played. A quirk in the NHL scheduling there. The Philadelphia Flyers beat the Washington Capitals, and they do it in relatively convincing fashion, 4-1, adding insult to injury there late as well. Ovechkin performs. He ends up with an assist, got 5 shots on goal, but did not score in the game. And Washington, after trading Carlson at the deadline, Ovechkin's longtime teammate, it appears they're waving the white flag. Philadelphia kind of doing the same thing. These two teams normally contenders, but not so much this year. What do you make of this result? I guess it was pretty handily in the direction of Philadelphia. And which one of these two teams, because we still have a decent amount of games left despite selling at the deadline, they have quality players, they're not going to quit. Which one of these two teams, aside from this result, maybe has a chance to get in there, get lucky, win some head-to-head battles, somehow crawl in the race? Because you have to imagine they would still rather do that than not, even if they believe they're not Stanley Cup contenders deep down.
Honestly, I'm not sure if either one of them is really going to
probably the right answer, to be honest.
If I had to pick one, I would say Washington, simply because I think they have the core, they have a little bit of a head start too. They're a few points ahead of Philadelphia. So when you're comparing the two of them in terms of who's closer to getting in, it's the Capitals, but also at the end of the day, the attitude around that locker room. I mean, clearly upper management was ready to just call it a season. They sell at the deadline. We know about, all the trades, and we know about Ovechkin's upset with his best friend going to Anaheim and all that other stuff. And he's kind of playing like it. I mean, he looks like he looks like a guy who's ready to retire anyway. And I think his the end of his career is starting to hit him, and he's starting to have those internal conversations with himself. And between that and all the players getting traded, this team just doesn't have the heart to get into the playoffs. I think if they had a little fire in their bellies and they had that heart, they might be able to sneak their way into one of those wild card spots. But right now, it's just all doom and gloom in that locker room, and I just don't think they have it. Philly, on the other side, they've got a lot of talent, but they're missing too many big pieces, and they don't always put that talent together. This is a great performance for them. I mean, they give up the first goal of the game in the first period and then come out and score 4 unanswered, and they get it done by their young guys. Zegras, Konechny, Tippett, all on the scoreboard here tonight, plus Alex Bump. He's been making a pretty big impact since he was called up from Lehigh Valley not too long ago. So this Philadelphia team certainly has a bright future, as does the Capitals. I just don't think either team is going to be able to make it this year.
Yeah, if I'm betting money, neither team's going to get there. And I hate throwing that accusation out there without actually knowing and being in these players' brains. But when you say there's not heart on Washington's side, it's fair. That's how they play. If Ovechkin doesn't score, they seemingly have no shot. They put the offense around him. He's the focus still, and it makes sense to be that. He was great the last couple of years in the spring, but it does appear that there's something out of him, the motivation, the tenacity that we're used to seeing from Alexander Ovechkin. If you just watch the interview on trade deadline day when he was told about John Carlson, it was a defeated Ovechkin that he literally called it. I believe his terminology was either the worst or the most depressing. I forget which one of those, but he referred to it as the worst day of his career, individually speaking. And he clarified, like, obviously a big loss early in his career in the playoffs of the Penguins or whoever might have been worse than this. But as an individual, just losing a friend, been there 17 years with him, won the cup with him, that was the worst day, learning he had been traded at the deadline this year. And it does kind of also scream, once he gets over Wayne Gretzky for the most overall goals, whether it be regular season, playoffs, all of it combined, he does have a ring. He's not going to get a second one. It's just not going to happen. They're years away from that. There's really nothing for him to play for anymore. Like, the only hope, I guess, could be that maybe Russia gets back in the Olympics and he plays on that team. But he doesn't necessarily have to be in the NHL to make that happen. Like, he may be, talented enough to get back in there if that would occur, even if he's retired from the NHL. Who knows? We've seen no longer NHL players play in the Olympics. In fact, win gold, and Pavel Datsyuk and Kovalchuk when the Olympic athletes from Russia, they weren't Russia, but OAR won gold. They weren't in the NHL at the time, so it could happen. Outside of that, I don't know what the motivation is for Ovechkin. I think losing Carlson has popped his balloon a little bit.
Yeah, I
on
remember
his career. So
yeah, I remember reading the story when they traded Nick Dowd first in the morning, and there was a lot of reports coming out that everyone was looking around going, wow, the locker room was quiet. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that was just one trade, and it is what it is. And then all of a sudden John Carlson goes, and I think that's when the team,
that's the one.
Oh, so we are completely fire sailing this situation.
Yeah, like, that tells the team, we don't believe in you anymore. We're going to send him to a younger team that's better than you out west that has a chance. He's going to maybe teach them how to win because he's done helping you win. That's really the message. And I get it for the franchise. It's probably smarter, but it feels like maybe Ovechkin went into the year thinking that would not be the result here in March, and it is. We're going to now check in, though. We will give it to the victor first. We have both hosts joining in this conversation here before we wrap things up. But I'll start off with our Locked On Flyers.
Flyers bounced back from the clunker against the Rangers with a very decisive 4-1 win versus the Washington Capitals. Hi, I'm Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. All of the Philadelphia Flyers goal scorers were important guys to get on the board in this game. We had the birthday boy and team points leader, Travis Konechny, who found open ice. Trevor Zegras with a fantastic 2-on-0 give and go, supported by Owen Tippett, who then himself got the all-important empty netter to seal the win. And, of course, Jamie Drysdale, whose game has been steadily improving with his shot during the second half of the season. He's on pace to match or exceed his career-high point total now. Sam Ersson got the start in this one and made some key saves as well. Nikita Grabenkin continues to impress with a balance of offensive pressure and peskiness that gets under opponent's skin. We'll have more on this game on the Thursday show.
And I think, and you kind of hit this too, the point of Philadelphia getting young players on the scoring sheet is very, very valid. And we're going to get into that more in our third segment of this show. But they're not going to win the cup this year, clearly. This year, unlike, say, for some other teams that we mentioned, say Ottawa playing above expectations, just to be close is a big deal for them. Philadelphia went in the year, as they do all the time, thinking, okay, this is a new era. Yeah, we're rebuilding. We didn't get a top pick out of it, but we always expect to contend. They didn't expect to be in this spot, whether you think that's fool's gold or not. In their eyes, they want to contend every year. So this is a very disappointing season for Philadelphia. We always know what their fans expect too. This is a bad year. But if you believe in this young group and you have something to believe in and they play well down the stretch, even if they don't get in, that provides some optimism for the future that I don't know if everybody thought was there a couple months ago. Because during this quasi rebuild, they didn't get a top draft pick out of it. They're kind of doing it with mid-tier draft picks, but they're playing very well as of late.
Yeah, they are. And it's because they're getting good production from their forwards. And that's where most of their youth movement is injected. When you talk about the Matvei Michkovs, when you talk about the Owen Tippett's, they're mostly forwards. You look at their defensive core. I mean, I don't know that you're going to get it done with guys like Jamie Drysdale, Noah Juleson. Here's their six that started tonight. Drysdale, Juleson, Rasmus Ristolainen, Travis Sanheim. That's a blue chip defenseman. He's a fantastic D-man for them. Nick Seeler and Cam York. Cam York's a little bit on the younger side, but he's a little raw yet. That defensive core needs a little bit of help, and they need a lot of help in the goalie room right now. Dan Vladar, you want to talk about a guy that's playing above expectations, Dan Vladar. I mean, this was a guy that was a career AHL goalie that is, he's had a couple of coffee here and there, and he's played in plenty of NHL games. I think it's, up to like 40 or 50 now at this point because he's been playing all this year. But him and Samuel Harrison are not your goaltending tandem for the future. I think they need to clean up that back end, and things will be a lot better. And that's, if you're a Philadelphia Flyers fan, that's what you look at this roster and you go, okay, the future is going to be brighter because we do have a lot of these young players. Now, I was a little surprised to see them ship off a guy like Bobby Brink, being such a youngster himself.
Right.
But, they still have plenty of youth, so they probably figured maybe that was one guy that they could get a decent asset for and not hurt the overall chemistry of the team and not hurt the overall age of the team either.
Yeah.
Still a young team.
Yeah, and it's just a crazy atmosphere there, though, in Philadelphia with the expectations that are always churn, and obviously a lot of pressure is going to be on next year for Tocchet and company to, at minimum, get this team back into the postseason. Then we'll see what happens from there. But there is a youth movement. There is a little bit reason now for optimism. I think more optimism is valid for Philadelphia's future than, say, it would have been if we were talking a couple months ago when they were having that rough start to the year. As we wrap up the conversation from the Flyers loss or from the Flyers win in the Washington's loss, we will now bring in the Capitals locked on host. And I kind of also feel like Dan Homey's another member of NHL game night here, locked on NHL game night. He's on every one of these. He's always joining the conversation. So we'll get we'll get what he has to say into this thing on a rough loss for Washington.
Capitals fans, the Caps really needed this one tonight, but they fall to the Flyers by a score of 4-1. Hi, this is Dan Homey of Locked On Capitals. Well, this was an ugly performance by our team, the Capitals, and bright spots right out of the gate. Ryan Leonard scoring a power play goal, his 13th of the season. He is riding a 4-game point streak, now 34 points on the season. But after that, it was ugly. There was messy puck handling. This was not Pierre-Luc Dubois' finest hour. He looked all out of sorts in this game. There was also sloppy passing between Protas and Tom Wilson. And ultimately, the Flyers made the most of their opportunities. Konechny, Zegras, Drysdale, and Tippett with the empty netter were too much for the Capitals to handle. Ultimately, in Liljegren's debut, he looked good out there, all things considered. I would like to see him paired back with Rasmus Sandin. Huge hit out there. Wilson on Konechny trying to get the troops rattled up. And ultimately, the Capitals tried to stage a third period comeback, but it wasn't to be. They're running out of runway and their hopes of making it in the playoffs in the 26th season.
Yeah, I'd imagine those hopes are dashed, but we will see if they can manage to muster anything up. We are going to now pause one more time, and when we return, we're going to talk about these four franchises that were in action on this very small 2-game slate hump day in the NHL here mid-March, spring action. Maybe this isn't the most rockin' day in the NHL season, but these teams could be relevant to the future. We'll see which one may be the most relevant when we come back here, another episode of Locked On NHL Game Night. Back with you, Mike Asti, TJ Chillot, Locked On NHL Game Night. And if you've been thinking about joining the Everydayer Club, now is the time. Again, if you get ad-free shows, access to our group chat on Discord, and you also get signed up before the NCAA tournament tips off, you get to be part of a bracket challenge there. If you get into the Everydayer Club, you have a chance to win Locked On merch. So it should be a lot of fun for you and all of us to have you aboard. It gives you VIP access to talk to our hosts, and we have a show for every NHL team. Right now, you can use Coach March to get your first month free, as you have an opportunity to join the Everydayer Club at really the best time of the year in the NHL calendar. But TJ, as we round out the show, we had 4 teams in action, all real bubble teams. Montreal in the best spot out of these 4 for this year. But I would think smart money is on that none of these teams are going to be crowned Stanley Cup champion. I do think that Montreal's drought there since 93, they're not going to add another one to their ledger of the most ever. Ottawa's not going to get number 1. The Flyers are not going to get that first in 75. The Capitals are not going to get another one for Ovechkin. That's just not going to happen this year. However, we talked about there's a youth movement now in Philadelphia, despite tons of expectations. Ottawa may be playing above expectations. You do have Brady Tkachuk, who is riding high and now is a marketable star. This could be part of our conversation because of what happened in the Olympics. You do have Ovechkin, hasn't announced his retirement, but would we be shocked if he does now without what's going on there? You get over Gretzky for the all-time goals, playoffs, regular season combined. What is there to do? Maybe he announces it. Maybe next year is a farewell tour, which gets you buzz for next year. But really, how good is this team for the future? And then Montreal, again, they're the best right now. Unlikely to be winning a cup anytime soon. Who knows? Maybe one more star is needed. They get love in Canada. They don't get that much press in the United States. So if all these 4 teams are on the board and something happens, whatever, general manager jobs are all open, and TJ Chillot gets a phone call, and you have an opportunity to pick any of these jobs. You get a call, and you get first crack at it, and whatever job you want, you can get. Which one do you think is the most attractive job for the future? And then how would you also rank these 1 to 4 in terms of attractiveness as a GM building this team? And you can take into account other things outside of just winning that might be important to a franchise, as I mentioned, with now the lore around Brady Tkachuk.
Yeah, let's start with the rankings, and I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. I'll tell you one job that if they'd have to call me and they'd have to back the truck up. It's Ottawa. Believe it or not, it's Ottawa.
Okay.
They do have a decent core with Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk. They have absolutely zero goaltending going on. There is just nothing. I mean, they haven't been able to figure that out for the last couple of years. They still have holes. They also have 0 first-round picks and second-round picks coming up in the 2026
Yeah, that's part of it.
draft.
Yeah.
So when you look at their prospect pool, when you look at the draft pick options they have, their core, which is very good, is not good enough to get me interested and be excited.
Okay.
Ottawa, you're out. I'm sorry. Also, they probably
And they're in Ottawa. They're in the Ottawa market. Like, it's a rough market.
It's very tough. I'm an American. They probably won't hire me anyway. So
Sure. That's true. Maybe that's the issue with the top marketable star winning a gold medal in the country they don't love. Like that, you have that kind of dynamic going on. That the guy they got to put in commercials, maybe the fans watching don't really love that much. And there's issues with the team and otherwise.
absolutely. My third team, so Ottawa 4, Philly would be third. I
Okay.
like the core, the Owen Tippett's, the Zegras, the Michkov, the Sanheim. They need goaltending. And if I, took that job, that's one of the first things I would do. We talked about it last segment too. I'd look also at their defense, but they don't have any 4th round or 5th round picks coming up this year, which hurts. I know that they're not, it's not as bad as not having a 1st or 2nd, but also you get a lot of good depth guys there. You get a lot of pieces for your American Hockey League team so that you can move some chess pieces around and see how things work out. But they do have 2 first-rounders in 2027, and they have 9 total picks in 2027. So when I look at that, I look at their team in Lehigh Valley this year, who's kind of a middling team. I could be persuaded. Now, for me personally, I'm also from that area, so that kind of is a little attractive. So,
yeah, I was going to say you only have them third, and you're from the area, kind of a homecoming of sorts. You win a cup there and break their drought. You're a hero back home. That could be interesting. Yeah,
they are.
Sure. Maybe your family and friends are going to raise their eyebrow at that selection. But
I don't see it happening.
It's fair though. It's fair though. Yeah, and the market is a much better one than Ottawa, of course, but a tough place to play, a tough place to be the GM. And you can even look at it this way, TJ. In Ottawa, if you make a playoff appearance, you probably got a 3, 4, 5-year runway to do whatever you want, because that's better than what they've seen. That's already above expectations. Even to be close right now, you're clearly not moving off the executive board. Philadelphia, to be close, you're on the hot seat. Next year to get in, you're probably on the hot seat. Like, they're expecting the cup every year, and obviously it hasn't happened in a long time. So you don't have much runway there. Like, you're going to have a job for 2 or 3 years, whether you're the coach or the GM, unless you're somehow making an Eastern Conference final appearance. And their cup final runs that they've had in previous decades have ended up in heartbreak. So you're dealing with a fan base that is very starving, that is figuring heartbreak's going to happen even when they're at their best. And you're saying they need goaltending. They've needed goaltending maybe since Ron Hextall.
Yeah,
really, in all reality, like since then, even in their final appearances with Lindros, and then even more recently, the net was still kind of their issue and held them back from lifting the cup. So I could see an argument of moving that up, but I could also see where you're coming from.
Here's why you don't move them up. Number 2, and this might be low-hanging fruit, but I have reasons here. Number 2 is Montreal. I know they're already in a playoff spot. They're third in the Atlantic, tied for second in the Atlantic after tonight.
Yeah.
They have a great coach. I love Marty St. Louis. I think he's a guy that, you get players for him. He's going to squeeze every bit of juice out of that.
He garners respect off how he played too.
100%. 100%. They've got a good core too, with Slavkovsky and Lane Hudson, Cole Caulfield, and Nick Suzuki. I really like that. They need goaltending help too. I don't trust in Fowler and Jakub Dobish. I would probably keep one of them around, but I would go looking for some veteran that has played a good amount of time, even if it's like a gap year. If Bobrovsky does end up leaving Florida, I would call him and say, hey, come play here for a year or two while we figure out our goaltending.
Binnington, I mean, he's clearly going to be available here coming up.
100, something like that. Yeah, I would go out and reach, just, hey, get us through this gap while we figure out what we're doing, and you're going to be the number 1 guy. So I think Montreal would be in number 2, and number 1 is Washington. I think a lot of people would probably put Montreal first, Washington second, but for me, I really enjoy their young core. When you talk about Ryan Leonard, Connor McMichael, Justin Sordiff, Alexi Protas, Ethan Frank, the Dylan Strome, these guys are fantastic. And you still have Tom Wilson. Maybe you get Ovechkin coming back if he wants to do take a victory lap like you mentioned a couple minutes ago. You still have him. I do like Logan Thompson. I think he's a great number 1 goalie. I don't know if Spencer Carberry, however, is the coach. So I may look at, do I want to make a coaching change there and see if I can get someone else in? You just look at his last 3 seasons, and he's he had 50 wins last year. They only had 30 some odd wins the year before. So he's kind of going up and down, and for the most part has had a solid cast of characters to put out there. And I just don't know if he's getting the best out of his players. So that's kind of my order: Washington, Montreal, Philadelphia, Ottawa. If all 4 of those jobs were open and they were all at my feet saying, please come fix us, that's my order.
Yeah. And I think it's a fair order. I definitely would say Ottawa is 4 here. I only could see the argument of, you do have a marketable star now that maybe has more notoriety than, say, he would have had months ago. And he also has a very popular podcast. Like, he's going to be put in the limelight. They're going to get chances in the national conversation just for Brady Tkachuk. But outside of that, the market's really tough. It's even tough in Canada. Even when they're a contender, it always feels like they never just have enough. They just never enough. And it's going to be really hard to get free agents to want to go there, even if you have the cap space, to be honest. They kind of have that issue that, say, Winnipeg would have as well. Philadelphia, just tons of pressure. I don't think they got enough as well. Young core is great, but they don't have that top draft pick. They don't really have that star to lead them. They need more than maybe some people think, and who knows how long the coach is going to be there, because there's already some that want him fired now off of just this year. I could maybe argue Montreal 1 and Washington 2, just for the fact that there's no life in Washington. And if Ovechkin retires, and even if he doesn't, you only have 1 year max with him, their future kind of looks in doubt in terms of who's going to be that top marketable star. Even if you like the core behind them, they don't have any plan really post Ovechkin. It almost seemed like the plan for a while was to let him have the record, do as much as we can to help him get the record, contend a little bit, but never fully cash in. And now with Carlson out there, honestly, maybe it'd be better for the franchise, and you let Ovechkin do whatever he wants. It might be better for the franchise's rebuild to have him retire now. 1 more year of him is almost kicking the can down the road 1 more time, but they will let him do that if he wants. Then Montreal feels like they may be closer, obviously a better team now, and they're at least getting love in Canada. We'll see about the U.S., but you put a goaltender there, you get Binnington there. Obviously, maybe he would catch some fanfare going there. Maybe Hellebuck, maybe they will hate him from the USA gold medal, but they're that it's clear path. It's a clear path of what they kind of need, whether you like the coach or not. And then just quickly here as we end this show, Montreal is likely going to be in the playoffs this year. So I'll ask it this way. Which one of these 4 is more likely to be in the postseason next year? And out of the 3 out of these 4 that are not going to be in the postseason this year, who do you think is more likely to get back in the postseason first?
Well, I think Montreal will be back next year. And I think Washington will be back next year.
Okay.
Ottawa and Philly, it all kind of depends on what they do in the offseason. And I'm thinking that Philly might sneak in if they have an above average year, if they really punch above their weight next season, they just get some things clicking. If they have a year kind of like Buffalo is having, and I don't mean necessarily in the success that Buffalo's having, but
right.
No one expected anything from Buffalo, and here they are. If Philly has that kind of year, then I think they could be in. Ottawa's, I think, is a little bit of a long shot. But Montreal, I think, is almost guaranteed to be in next year, because they're only going to get better with what they have. That young core is only going to get better. Washington, there are questions. And just to go back to your point, after Ovechkin retires, I think Tom Wilson is the guy that you kind of look at as like the face of the franchise. But
true. It's a different face. It's a different, he's had a nice resurgence. I don't buy into the whole conversation of him going to the Hall of Fame, but like he's been okay the last several years. As much more early in his career, he really just seemingly was looking to be that physical force. He's much more than that now. He's a legit stud. He's a legit star. He can certainly put the puck in the net as well and generate offense. But him being your best player feels like not nearly enough.
No. And I think he might not be your best player per se, but I think he's your marketable face, right?
That's
he's
fair.
The guy that you're putting on the season ticket voucher.
The fans love him the most if you take Ovechkin away, 100%.
Exactly. And he's leadership material, so he's going to bring those young guys up the right way. Maybe a little physical, but still the right way.
Yeah. It might be weird, though, if the guy wearing the C ends up being suspended multiple times throughout a year. Like, that might be something you think about before anointing him and putting that on his jersey, because that's still a possibility with Tom Wilson. No matter how many goals he may score and how many points he may have, that's still within him. And it's almost like he can't hold it in too long. You go 10 games and he's just itching to do something. So that'll be interesting with somebody wearing the C, if that is their life. But yeah, in terms of marketable, they probably have to do it. And he would be the veteran, and we will see. Although if I had to predict, I don't know if Washington gets back in the playoffs next year unless they do something crazy in this offseason. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Keep it right here for more episodes of Locked On NHL Game Night after every night of action in the NHL. And of course, we have a team show for every team throughout our NHL YouTube channel here throughout the Locked On Network. And if you want complete coverage of your favorite NHL team, there is a Locked On NHL Team podcast and YouTube show for you, because we have one for every team. And this show, Locked On NHL Game Night, is here for you each and every night of the regular season and playoffs, wrapping up the night in the NHL. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Even comment on a comment on these shows, and also download them wherever you get your podcast. That'll do it for this episode of the show. For TJ Chillot, I'm Mike Asti. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.